Welcome to the Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World Video Library. Bass Pro Shops has brought together the finest names in outdoor recreation to create a video library second to none. Learn from today's top professional hunters and fishermen as they share the tips and techniques that have made them successful. You'll find the secrets from the best of the best, all right here in this outstanding video collection. Check out the latest Bass Pro Shops catalog for more of your favorite topics. And thank you for watching. For the latest copy of the Bass Pro Shops catalog, call toll-free 1-800-BASS-PRO. Renowned crappie fisherman Sam Heton has been guiding for slab crappie for over 20 years. His reputation as a master angler has led him to conduct seminars and direct major crappie tournaments throughout the South and across the country. In this video, you'll go along with Sam during a 6-day crappie fishing adventure on Alabama's Lake Weiss and Missouri's Truman Lake. Sam will share his favorite tactics and secrets perfected during countless hours devoted to the pursuit of one of America's favorite fish, the crappie.
Little black one. A little black crappie. That's a male right there. Yeah, see his fins? Okay. Hello, my name's Sam Heton, and the people at Bass Pro Shop have asked me to share some of the methods and techniques I've learned over the last 22 years of guiding with you. In this video, I'm sure there's one of these methods that'll work for you. So get comfortable, get your notebooks out, and let's go crappie fishing. The flying cork is one of my favorite techniques in the spring of the year when the spawn has started. What it amounts to is you've got 2 jigs, you've got a cork, and this cork is fixed on your line, okay, at a constant depth. And that way I can determine exactly at what depth I'm going to be fishing. So if I pull up in here in a 4 and 5 foot flat, it's got stumps and rocks and brush and all on it, what I can do, I can determine at what depth I want to start fishing, and I can keep my jigs at that depth all the time. I don't have to be trying to guess at what depth I'm fishing. So with the cork and the flies on here, it makes it a lot easier to determine at what depth you're fishing your jigs all the time. And these fish are up in here around these stumps and around this brush, up in here in a spawning pattern, okay? They're getting ready to do their deal. The dogwoods are blooming, the spring of the year, it's getting warmer. So these fish are starting to move up in here, and that's exactly where you want them, up in these stumps. And this is the most effective technique that I have for catching these fish up here in the shallow stumps. There he is. There he is. That's a pretty good fish. You know, these fish will move up in here around these stumps according to weather conditions. A lot of people talk about crappie. That's a heavy fish. They talk about crappie spawning on the moon phases. Well, that has a lot to do with the weather conditions. One of the things that I've found that as you get more light penetration, as the sun gets brighter or you get cloud cover, you have to change the different colored jigs. Like here I'm fishing a white and chartreuse with a red head. Above it up here, I'm fishing just a solid green jig. But if we started getting a lot of cloud cover, of course today's a real bright bluebird day, but if we started getting a lot of cloud cover, I might go to a black and chartreuse. You know, have a little more color contrast in my jig. It just seems like on bright, sunny days, they like a little more of a brighter, more translucent jig, and on darker days, they like darker jigs. I tell y'all what, let's let him go back and finish up his business out there in those stumps. See you, bud. What I'd like to do right now is just take a few minutes and show y'all exactly how to tie up this flying cork, because it's a little bit deceiving when you first start talking about it. But what I do is I start with a jig. Now the jigs can be like I said a while ago, they can be 16ths, they can be 32nds, they can be 24s. But I had rather, if I'm going to use two, I'd rather use a little bit smaller jig. And what I do is I tie this first jig on with a Palomar knot. And a Palomar knot is a knot that, most of y'all already know how to tie. And it's just a simple little Palomar knot. Okay? Pull it down and trim it off. Okay? Now, I want to come up about 18 inches and tie the second jig on. And the way I do that, I do it the same way with a Palomar knot. I just pinch my line down good and tight. You know, I don't see as well as I used to back when I was 21 years old. And then I tie it on with the same, with just another Palomar knot. But I did pretty good on that one. I didn't have to stick at it but 2 or 3 times. Okay, got him tied on. So you got both your jigs tied on there. And they're about 18 inches apart, okay? Now, what I'm going to do, with this hump that I'm fishing out here is about 5 feet deep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at about a 3-foot depth. And I take my cork. It's just a little simple 29, 39-cent plastic cork that you get at your bait shop. And I take and I put it on my line. But the thing I don't do is, as I said a while ago, I just hook one end of the cork. I don't run it back through the top because I want it to sit up on top of the water and swirl and dance and bobble around. The only thing that you have to be careful of in remembering is that when you select the size jigs, your jigs here, make sure that they're not too heavy and sink your cork, because if that cork sinks, it's not going to be as sensitive as it would be if it was sitting up on top bobbling around. And that's the flying cork. One of the things about the flying cork technique is that you can cover a lot of water in a very short period of time. What I'm doing is I'm just fan casting around in these shallow water stumps in here. I'm just fan casting and covering as much of this water as I can, as quickly as I can, because all of it's not going to be productive. As the sun begins to get brighter, you know, the fish are going to be, they possibly could be on the shady sides of the stumps. So, you know, you want to cover as much water as you possibly can in the shortest amount of time you can and establish that pattern. And once that pattern's established, then you can start picking it apart. You can start pinpointing your cast. But what we do, we fan cast it and covering as much water as possible in the shortest amount of time. Come here, Mr. Crappie. Come here, Mr. Crappie. he thinks he's a smallmouth. Come here, Mr. Crappie. Come here, boy. You know, one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make, especially in the spring of the year, is what they'll do, they'll fish under the fish. I always start, if this is 5 foot deep, I always start like at 3 and work down from 3 to 4 to 5 or to when I start catching fish. But I start shallow and work deep. Most people have a tendency to fish under these fish. So you want to be sure that as that water temperature starts coming up in 53, 55, 57 degree water temperature, that you want to be out here in these shallow stumps. But especially in the PM, in the afternoon hours, the fish have a tendency to be shallower than they are in the AM hours, in the early morning hours, because of the surface temperature. The water hadn't warmed up yet. But in the afternoon hours, you're going to find that the fish will be shallower than they will in the morning. Just let him go back. One of the things about flying cork, you want to make sure that you use tube jigs or a hair or a marabou jig. Just something like similar to this black, with this red black with a white feather on it. The reason is because when you're fishing that flying cork, and you get right beside the structure that you're fishing, you want to just be able to just kind of twitch that cork and make this little cork right here just stand up there and turn around and around in the water. You're actually not moving it out of the strike zone, but what you're doing, you're giving that bait some attractant to the fish. And these tube jigs, they have these little very minute tails on them, and when you just kind of twitch them in the water, they just kind of swim along just like that. So when you're using a flying cork, make sure you use a tube jig or you use a marabou hair jig. It'll be a lot more productive for you. Flying cork. Come up here, Mr. Crappie. Which one did you hit? You hit the black and sharp first. Flying cork. when you want to control, it's pretty good crappie, when you want to control that depth, when you want to make sure that you're staying, you've pretty much got the strike zone figured out, and we're saying that these fish are suspended out here in 6 feet of water, about 15 feet deep. We're right up against the bank, and what I'm doing, I'm paralleling that bank, keeping that flying cork in 6 feet of water the maximum amount of time. Okay? And what that's going to do, that's going to produce the maximum amount of strikes because I'm staying in the strike zone longer. Now we've got the color figured out. We've got a black and chartreuse on bottom and a white and pink on top. That's a crazy color combination, but that's the way it goes. And we got our cork peg. I would like to tell everybody I'm 6 feet tall, but I'm only 5'10". So, so we're down about, we got our cork at 6 feet. So we're fishing 6 feet deep over about 16 feet of water. And that's where these fish are. Hey, that's a pretty decent little fish there. It feels good anyway. You know, flying cork, you know, the thing about it is you can fish this thing on down to about 8 feet deep. So when you're looking for depth control, I mean the ultimate in depth control, he's not near as big as I thought he was, but he's a crappie. But when you're looking for the ultimate depth control, I mean you really have got, like, right now these fish have kind of slowed down, and you're looking for the ultimate depth control, flying cork is the most precise technique that you can use. Once you've established that depth, then you're just not going to go wrong. I mean, you can't find a better way to stay at a consistent depth than the flying cork. You want to just kind of walk that thing around those stumps. There he is right there. As I was talking about, you just want to kind of walk it around those stumps. Make sure that you fish the productive side of it as far as the sunlight. And stay in good position on this thing. You know, there's another one. He hit that top hook that time. That top jig. He's not a very big one. He must not have been back down in there with those great big one fish. Just make sure that when the water temperature starts coming up to 53, 55 degrees, that you get out here on top of some of these bars that have some stumps, that have brush, that have rocks, where these fish are starting to spawn. Because they're going to move up in here, and this can be some of the best crappie fishing of the whole year up around this visible cover with the flying cork. Another visible cover crappie right there. You know, visible cover is one of, he's not the biggest one in the lake, but he sure is a fish. You know, visible cover is one of the easiest ways there is to catch crappie. The reason it's the easiest way is because you don't have to have any special equipment. You don't have to have a depth finder. You don't have to have a trolling motor. All you have to have is some way to get out here and a sculling paddle. And you fish anything that's sticking up above the water line. So it makes it real easy for you to locate a place to fish. And you come to a strange lake, just like I am here, and you can always catch a few fish around visible cover. So visible cover is a real neat way to fish for crappie in the spring of the year, and there's a lot of different ways to fish for them. There's a little bit better fish. All right. Once they get that grass over their eyes, they don't do much. Visible cover. You know, this technique, what we're doing, we're taking the long pole. This is a 10-foot graphite, B&M graphite jig pole, and it's got 210 spider wire on it. And what we're doing, in a little 16th ounce jig, and I'm going to turn this fish back. What we're doing, we're taking this little black and chartreuse tube jig, and we're just going down through here, and I'm fishing all the holes that you can see out here in this, I guess you'd call it sawdust or debris or whatever. I just drop it right down in there, and I jig it around for a few minutes. If I don't get a bite, I pick it up, move it right over here. It's kind of like these bass guys are flipping, but we're just kind of put our jig down in these holes right beside this cover. And the advantage of the long pole is I don't have to cast. I can put it exactly where I want it in as many different places as I want to. just right. I mean, do you have any idea how many times it would take me to cast into that hole right there? Believe me, it would take a lot. So, but with the long pole, all I've got to do is just kind of put it in there. If it gets hung, I just pop it right back out. Take the debris off of it. Reset my depth wherever I want it. If I want to fish 5 feet deep, I usually fish about 18 inches. I rig my bait about 18 inches deeper than what I want to fish. And the reason I do that is because when I drop it in beside these bushes and in this visible cover, I keep my rod tip about 18 inches off the top of the water. So I know that I'm fishing at 5 feet deep. It just makes it a lot easier to control your depth. And once I determine what, looks like most of these fish are in about 5 feet of water. But once I determine what depth I want to fish, I just drop it right down in the beside it. And a lot of times what you can do, you can lay it over a limb just like I'm doing right there. And just fish it straight down. And it works. It's the ticket. That's a hungry little rascal there. Man, he ate it up too. Yeah. Boy, that strike is such a presence. It's a pretty nice one. Okay, visible cover. It's an easy deal. And the thing about it is, you can fish so much of it, you know. I mean, just how much of it do you want to fish? I mean, you can work as hard as you want to, or you can work as little as you want to. See, this is a little bit different deal. This is an isolated cedar right out in the middle of this slough. It's the only thing out here, okay? So if those fish are going to relate to something out here, they're going to have to relate to this cedar because there's nothing else out here around it. So once you find a piece of isolated structure like that, that can be a key, you know. Really concentrate on it, move around it, fish all the points in it, fish all the little pockets, whatever. Because if those fish are going to be in here, they got to be out here because it's the only thing out here. Right down in the middle of that stuff. Hey man, he thinks he's bad to the bone. Right down in the middle. Get my line. There you go. Another thing that I want to talk to you about on fishing this visible cover. Here's another tip. Always make sure that after you catch a fish or get hung, that you pull that knot back to the back of that eye, just like that right there, so that that jig will lay in a horizontal plane and won't be, I don't think the jig, if it's swimming through the water straight up and down like this one right here would be, I don't think that looks very natural. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I pull that Palomar knot to the back of that jig head so that that jig will actually swim in a horizontal plane through the water. I just think it looks a lot more natural. And plus, by doing it that way, you're going to hook a lot more of these fish in the hard part of the mouth, up in the top of the mouth, in the roof of their mouth, and you're going to land a lot more of them. There's nothing I hate worse than losing a fish that I'd like, any of them, even the small ones, because I want to do the culling up here on the boat. I don't want to do it out there in that bush. Let's talk about jig weights just a minute. You know, and what I mean by jig weights, I mean the weight of the head. One of the rules I have, I want to fish the lightest jig that I can get away with, but I want to still have some feel. It's just like this presentation right here. This is a big, heavy 1/8 ounce jig head. And this is about as heavy a jig head as I'm going to use for crappie, unless I'm in a tail race situation or something like that where I've just got to get down. But I wouldn't use this jig, this 1/8 ounce jig head, for a vertical jigging presentation because it would fall too fast. Here again, I wouldn't use this little bitty 1/16 ounce jig head for what we'll say vertical jigging, bumping bottom out in 20-25 feet of water. I'd use this jig head. You want to use the lightest jig head you can possibly use, but still have contact with it when you're trying to fish it. You know, that way you can make the jig do what you want it to do, and you're not trying to always find out what the jig's doing. You know, one of the great things about fishing visible cover with the long pole is the tighter the cover gets, the harder it gets to fish. But with the long pole, what you can do, you can actually thread the needle with it. And what I mean by thread the needle, I mean you can pull that jig up right to the very tip of your rod tip. Okay? And then you can take it and work in and around, just like right here to the base of this big cedar. I can stick it right in here and then just drop that jig down. Just drop that jig, shake my rod tip, and drop that jig down right beside that trunk with that cedar tree. Well, there's no way I could ever make a cast in there, or even swing it in there because of these overhead limbs. But see how I've got that right in there like that? Right at the base of that cedar tree, right in the very heaviest part of this cover. There's a bite right there. One thing you got to do is, just like you do as you put the bait in there, you got to pull that fish up next to your rod tip and work him out of that cover. Oh, we're going to get him out of here now. And swing him out here to the open place. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Just, if you can pull that, that's a little black crappie. If you can, when you pull that jig up to the tip of the rod, pull it up there, stick it in there, stick it in that brush, shake it and let it down. Of course, you've already got your depth preset. Shake it down in there. When you get that strike, reach up here with your left hand and pull that fish right up next to your rod tip, okay? And then guide him out of that brush. If you don't do that, you'll never get him out of that. See, there's no way we can try to pick that fish up in that brush like that. So what we have to do, we have to pull him up there where we can do something with him and then guide him out of there. You know, one of the best visible covers is boat docks. They're easy to fish with this shooting technique, and they produce a lot of good fish. That's a good crappie. You know, it's not a monster, but it's a good one. And he came right out from under that. If you can see right up under that boat dock right there, he came right out from under that boat dock between those two posts in there. And what you have to do, I'm gonna release that fish. What you have to do is to fish with this shooting technique. And it takes a medium action spinning rod, just a good 6-foot medium action spinning rod. This is 210 spider wire and a 32nd ounce jig. And you hold it between your thumb and your forefinger, just like that right there. And you hold your line with your finger right here. And as I shoot it up under that ladder, just like that, I turn loose with both fingers at the same time. Takes just a little bit of practice, but it's a great technique. Swim that little jig out from under there. Oh, there he is, right there. Mr. Crappie? Hey, that's a good fish. There he is. You know, one thing you need to remember, there's a lot of things to put together on dock shooting. One is size of jig, line size, the right action rod. Well, once you master the technique and get everything put together, just like the pieces of a puzzle, it'll all come together and you can catch some good fish shooting these docks around this visible cover. What we're doing is we're actually vertically fishing this bank. This bank, of course, you can see all the cover, and the cover is out away from the bank, and we're staying out here in about 18 feet of water, and we're fishing this bank. He needs to go back. We're paralleling the bank, fishing it up and down the bank instead of throwing into it and fishing back out. You know, and once you find the depth that the fish are in, that's a white male. Once you find the depth that the fish are in, it can be very, very productive. Come on in here, big guy. Here again, paralleling these banks, tight lining these jigs. Look at him. See, now that's what the male does. He sperms those eggs. That's a big deal. Okay, paralleling these banks. They're cruising, okay? They're just cruising up and down these banks, and they're staying in what I think, I haven't been up there to check it, but I think they're around 5 foot deep. So what we're doing is I'm trying to fish that jig up and down that bank and keep it in 5 feet of water just as the maximum amount of time. There you go. Come on, baby. Yeah. They're hanging around out there in that 5 foot of water. Whew. All of them look alike, though, don't they? All of them look alike. Hanging out there in that 5 feet of water. Tough little fish. Most sought after fish in America. It's a crappie. You know, bridges can be a great place to find crappie. First of all, bridges are always built across rivers and they're always built across creeks, which are natural migration routes for these fish. Another reason is they have bait fish present, and they also always have some current present. So let's pull in here and see if we can catch a fish off one of these bridge pilings. Okay. Suspended around that bridge piling. Suspended down there in about 10, 12 feet of water. I've got them on my depth finder right here. Okay, come up here, Mr. Crappie. I'm trying to keep the boat in position. But what these fish have done, they've suspended down around 10 or 12 feet of water around that bridge column. They do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, the bait fish are in there eating the plankton off the bridge column, and there's always a little bit of current in there. So anytime you're on a lake that has a man-made lake where it has bridges, bridge columns, bridge columns are a very good place to look for fish. Visible cover is very obvious. It's not hard to find. You don't need any special equipment, but the bridge columns hold the fish because of two things: because they hold the bait fish, and also because there's some current present. One of the big advantages to the braided line is the sensitivity. It has 3 to 4 times more sensitivity than monofilament does because it doesn't have any stretch in it. But what I really like to do, I also like to be able to watch my line. I'll see a lot of the strikes that I never feel. So I fish the white. But being a fisherman, me being kind of skeptical, what I want to do is I wanted to camouflage this line so the fish can't see it. So what I've got just this is a blue. Kind of matches the color of the water that we're fishing in. I use blue, green, brown, black, whatever color, and I just take the magic marker and I color the line. And I'll color that line 3 or 4 feet in front of that jig. And what it does, it camouflages the part of the line that the fish is going to be seeing, but it also allows me to keep the part that I'm going to be seeing white so that I can detect those strikes that I never feel. Oh, there he is. There he is. Oh, Lord have mercy. Had to have him some of that live bait, didn't you? Had to have him some of that live bait. You know, that just goes to show you. I fished these trees with the artificial. And I went back and I felt like there was some more fish there, and the wind's gotten up and it's a little bit harder to fish the artificial now. So what I did, I came back with my live bait. What I did, I went back with my live bait, and I'm using a live bait rig. And what this is all I've got. I've got a swivel, a couple of pieces of shot, and a slip cork. The slip cork is the key to the whole thing. I've got the slip cork and then the bead, and then I've got what we call a bobber stopper. And all it is a piece of string tied around the main line here. And what that does, that allows me to fish 6 feet deep. Well, you say, well, you can fish 6 feet deep with any cork, Sam. But here's the trick. As you'll notice, as I pick this rig up, that I'm only trying to lift up 8 or 10 inches of line through the brush top. In other words, I don't have to try to manipulate 6 or 7 feet of line back down through those limbs in that brush top. All I have to do is manipulate this 8 or 10 inches of line that from my lead down to my hook. That's all I have to worry about. So it just makes it a lot easier to place that live bait in there, just like we were doing with the artificial bait. There he is. I'll tell you, it doesn't take live bait again. It doesn't take a lot of strength to set that hook. And what I mean, if you're using the right hook, I've always used a gold wire hook. You know, they make them in Aberdeen also, but I've always preferred the gold. I don't know where it's the extra shine. I don't know where it's the just psychological. And another thing about wire hooks is if you get them hung, you can straighten them out, okay, and pull them free, where you can't with forged hooks. You'll break your line. This is 20-pound test line. I'm using braided line, but regardless, and that will straighten any wire hook out there. So I can straighten these wire hooks out. All I got to do is take my pliers, bend the hook back into the original shape of it, and then put another minnow on there and go right back to fishing. If I was using the forged hooks and broke my line every time, I'd have to re-rig every time. There he is. Hey, that's a pretty decent little fish there. Right here on that slip cord. You know, one of the things that on live bait fishing, on days, that one right there is just, he's right in the middle of the spawn. See how black his fins are and all? That's a male white crappie. One of the things about live bait fishing is that when you're on days when fishing is really tough, I mean when it's just almost impossible to get a bite, I will catch more fish on live bait. But on days when the fishing is good, I'll catch more fish on artificial bait. When you're fishing artificial bait, you don't have to take the time to rebait your hook. You can just keep using the same bait, throw in there faster. It's a lot faster on days when fishing's good if you're using artificial bait. But on the days when fishing's really tough and it's hard to get a strike, it's really hard to fool Mother Nature. So you'll do better with live bait. You know, I get the opportunity to go a lot of different places and talk about crappie fishing. And I guess the most often asked question is, Sam, how do I catch these fish after they spawned and go back out to the deep water? Well, in the next part of this video, what we're going to try to do is show you exactly how to locate these places where these fish will be on your topo map. Come out in your boat, find them, and some techniques and some tricks that I've learned over the years in the guide business on how to rig up and catch these fish. You know, as crappie fishermen, one of the biggest assets we have is a topo map. It can hold a wealth of information. And what I like to do, I like to take an area of the lake and I like to find 3 or 4 different places that I'm going to try to fish in the day's time. Like this sandbar right here. I can tell by the contour lines this sandbar's in about 14 feet of water. And it's got a road bed running through it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take my depth finder and I'm going to go out there and locate this road bed. Then I'm going to locate some cover on that road bed and mark it with this marker right here. Then I'm going to take my vertical jig, my bottom bumping live bait rig, and I'm going to work that cover to catch those fish that are down there suspended in and around that cover on this road bed out here. So if you take your topo map and find you 3 or 4 real good places to fish before you ever go out on the lake, you've got a direction to go in, and things just seem to happen then when you've got something to go to and something to look for. At least it gives you a place to start out there on that lake. What we've done, back at the marina, we picked a spot out on the topo map. Of course, I know where it is out here. I fished it a lot of times. I know it's got some brush on it. And what I've done, I've got some lineup points. Like I know the corner of that boathouse right there has to be on the corner of that house. And I come out here to where my depth finder comes up into 16 foot of water. And when I get right here, I know that that brush is going to be right under the boat. We're out here in 24. It'll start coming up here just a minute. Here it comes right now. It's up to 21, 19, 18, 17, 16, and there's the brush right on top of it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to drop my marker right on top of the brush so that I won't be out here running around trying to find it again. And then I'll take my trolling motor and my depth finder up front and work precisely right down in that cover. Vertical jigging that cover with the live bait rigs. Okay. What I'm doing is I'm taking this bottom bumping rig and all I'm doing is just walking up and down that riverbank with it. All right, Mr. Crappie. All I'm doing, and by walking up and down the riverbank, what I mean is that I'm taking this bottom bumping rig and I'm letting it down. I've got about a 1 ounce sinker on the bottom, and I'm letting it down, and I'm just taking and I'm walking it up that riverbank. Using my depth finder, using my trolling motor. I'm not casting or dragging it. You can't drag it. If you drag it, it's going to get hung, okay? Because you got stumps down there, you got brush down there, you got all kind of structure on that riverbank. So I keep it straight up and down, and I walk it around down there. Not raising it way up off the bottom, but just kind of jigging it, just picking it up about 1 or 2 inches at a time, and keep in contact with that bottom all the time. And if you work it around enough of that structure, you're gonna catch some fish, because that's where they are 8 months out of the year. They're down here around this structure down here. They're not out there on the top of these sandbars and out here around these flats and all. They're down there around that structure. Let's get some more bait on here. Come on, fish. He liked the minnow. Yeah, that's a good crappie. Likes those minnows. You know, as soon as I get this one, he's a good fish. You know, not a giant, but he's a good keeper fish. Get back down in there, boy. You know, while we're out here and we're talking about minnows, I just want to say some things about them. And let's look at these minnows. Here we got several different sizes, and there's several different kinds of minnows. First of all, I like a minnow that's about 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches long. I don't like a real small minnow. Now, if the fish are hitting small minnows, I'll go to small minnows, but when I start, I'm going to start with a minnow something like this, about 1.5 inches or 2.5 inches long. These are shiners. On this lake, with this watercolor, looks to me, you know, I feel like they're going to hit the shiners better than they are the toughies or the Kentucky chubs or some other kind of minnows. But now, if this water's a little bit dingier, we get a minnow called an Indiana Red. And it's the same size minnow, except it has a real orange tint to it. And if the water's dingy, you know, it seems like to me that the fish like those type minnows or those red minnows better. So, you know, you artificial fishermen, y'all may not think so, but minnows are a big deal. If you don't have good bait, if you don't have fresh bait, you're really working with a big disadvantage. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the bottom bumping rig right now. What it's tied out of, it's tied out of heavy 15 to 20 pound monofilament, and I attach it to the braided line. But the way I tie it is, first thing I do is I tie a weight on the bottom of my monofilament, just like this right here, and I usually tie it with a Palomar knot. Okay, and then I come up and I just make a loop, and I tie the loop with a figure 8. You come around your fingers just like that right there, okay? I put this finger in there and I twist the line a half a turn. Then I take this loop and stick it right back through. And the reason they call it a figure 8 is because it looks like a figure 8. Then I pull it tight. And the reason I use a figure 8 knot right here, it doesn't cut your line like some of the other knots will. I want to put me a couple of half hitches in there to make that line stick together. In other words, make that line where it'll stick straight out away from my main line, so that my minnow won't just wrap around and round and round my other line. And that's what I mean by putting the half hitches in there just like that right there. Okay? After I get the half hitches in there, I put a light wire hook. Alright? The light wire hook is very important. If you try to use a heavy steel forged hook or a heavier hook, what you're going to do, you're going to wind up breaking a lot of these hooks off. With the wire hook, all I have to do is just pull in a little bit and it straightens right out. And I double it together and I stick it right through the eye of the hook. Okay? And then I just come around and loop my hook. I don't tie my hook on, I just loop it on there. Just like that right there. And that's the way it comes out looking. Okay? Then I come up another 18 inches. Now y'all need to check with your state fishing regulations to make sure you can fish 2 hooks on one line. But here in Alabama we can do that with no problem. And I tie another figure 8 knot. Just make another loop. Alright? Now I put my half hitches in it also. It gives it some rigidness. It makes it stand out away from the main line. Alright. Now, take my other wire hook, light wire hook, double my line, stick it through the eye of my hook, okay? Then just bring that loop right down over the hook. Like so. Okay, now I've got a bottom bumping rig, just like this right here. Now, let me talk to you just a little bit about hooking the minnows. The way I hook my minnows on this rig right here, let me see if I can get one out of my bucket here. Okay. The way I hook my minnows, he's awful small, there's a good one, is I like to hook my minnows right through the eyes. I hook my minnow in one eye and out the other. Now, that may seem a little morbid to some of y'all, but the reason I do that is that now he can still breathe and he can still swim. So he's going to last longer, he's going to live longer, and he's going to have a lot more action by hooking him through the eyes. And he don't want to see what's fixing to happen to him anyway. When I'm out here on this riverbank, I try to visualize this riverbank in my mind's eye. And I use my depth finder as my eyes. There's nothing for me to see out here. There's nothing for me to cast at. But to be more effective, I want to visualize that thing in my mind so that I know when I'm coming out of that 17-foot water, up into that 15, up into that 12, and then back down into the 12, the 15, and the 17. If you can visualize that in your eye, in your mind, using your depth finder as your eyes, you're going to be a lot more productive with this technique. You know, topo maps have a wealth of information on them. And if people will utilize them, they can be a very, very important part of your fishing trip. The first thing I want to know about a topo map is where the contour lines are. On this particular map, it says underwater depth lines are shown at 10-foot intervals. That means that there's 10 feet between each contour line. There, I can go out there now and I can find me some places that I want to fish. I can find some long tapering points. I can find some creek channels. I can find some creek channel, river channel intersections. I can find these things that are going to be natural holding places for fish. One of the best map readers I've ever known in my life was Roland Martin. And he has maps on every lake that he's ever fished. And he really utilizes these maps. And those maps can make him a better fisherman than just think what they can do for a novice fisherman out there, or especially a guy that's going to go to a strange lake that's never been there before, and he wants to find something out about the lake before you get there. So utilize these topo maps. Learn to read them. Pick you out some spots before you go to the lake. Go to those spots. It'll make you a lot more productive fisherman. It'll make your trip a lot more enjoyable. Topo maps, they're the way to go. You know, trolling is a very productive technique. It's a very good way to find fish, especially if you're going to a strange lake. What you want to do, you want to use different length rods, different colored lures, different size lures, until you establish a pattern. And once you establish a pattern, then all you've got to do is relate that back into the water that you're fishing, and you know, you can catch you some fish like this right here. Trolling is one of the most productive techniques that I have. It requires a depth finder, a trolling motor, several different length rods, several different weights of lures. And what we'll do is we go into this segment, I'll try to bring all those things out and tell you exactly how everything ties together to make it a good productive technique to help you catch some fish. Not the biggest one in the lake, but he's a good keeper. See you later, son. What we've got here, we've got a pre-spawn pattern. We're up here in this big creek and we're trolling for crappie. And the way we're doing it, we're using our depth finder, we're using our trolling motor, and we're using our different length rods to keep our jigs separated, and we're trolling for these suspended fish out here. As the water begins to get warmer, these fish will move back against the banks and start their spawning procedure. But right now, they're suspended out here over deep water. And if we do all our homework, try our different colored jigs, our different size jigs, then we'll establish a pattern and we'll start picking our pattern apart. We'll go from a very broad pattern down to exactly what color jig, exactly what size jig, and exactly what we want to do. Hey, there's one right there on that. We've just now got started and we've already got him on. He's a pretty good fish. This is a good sign. There's nothing like having this as a good sign right here. Come on, baby. The different length rods too, it helps you manipulate these fish in and out of these. That's not a giant, but he's a good crappie. He's a keeper on Weiss Lake. It has to be 10 inches long. This jig here is kind of an opaque color. In other words, it's dark here and it's chartreuse here on the back end, and it shows it gives off a lot of light reflection, and it also has a lot of contrast between the top of the water and so the fish can see it in the water. But you know, colors make a lot of difference. This fish here, he's a white male crappie, and you know, he's a pretty nice little fish. We're going to put him back in. We're going to let him have another chance, okay? Next time when we catch him next year, he'll be 1 pound bigger than what he is right now. See you, buddy. Thanks. There he goes. Okay. Come on in here, Mr. Crappie. Are you a big crappie or you're a little crappie? You fighting like a big one. What we did, we kind of changed locations. The other location we were in was it got muddy back in the back end up there, and I felt like we needed to get in a little bit clearer water. So here's one right here. This is the first one. We just got up here. The first one, and this is a male. So that's a good sign. All we got to do now is locate the majority of the school. I'm certainly hoping we catch them bigger than that. That's a good one. Okay. Now, so we've determined they're on black and chartreuse jigs. We're in 7 feet of water. And you know, one thing about catching crappie, especially in the trolling technique, you want to try to discover or try to establish a pattern within a pattern. Not just that the fish are in 5 feet of water. We want to find out if the fish are in 5 feet of water. You want to find out what color they're hitting and at what speed they're hitting. You know, and all those things put together will make a successful pattern, especially in the trolling technique. So there's a little bit more to it than just throwing them out and taking off. Wait a minute, here's another one right here. Oh, missed him. You know, one of the most important things about the trolling technique is the type rod holder that you use. A rod holder has to have a couple of characteristics. First of all, it has to be real easy for the rod to come out, okay? You want to be able to reach down and get that rod out of the rod holder without having to do a lot of mechanics like flipping levers and unscrewing locks and all that kind of stuff. You want to be able to just reach down and pull that rod, see, just like this right here, okay? See, now that's all that took to get that rod out of the holder, and that's a pretty good fish. But rod holders are very important in the trolling technique. You've got to have them. You don't want the rod to come out of them too easy, because if it comes out of them too easy, then you're going to lose a lot of equipment, and that's bad. You know, we don't want that to happen. But the rod holder is very important. It has to be efficient, but it also has to be very simple to operate. And here's another one that has the dreaded eye disease. His eyes is too close to this little thin part right here called his tail. That's a little bigger, but he's not a monster either. I want one of them that's got eyeballs about the size of quarters. And see, he hit a blue. What you got to do, you've got to make a determination. He's not a keeper. What you got to do, you've got to make a determination on what color, what size, what depth. You put a lot of different stuff out there and find out what's working. And then you, once you find out, discover what is working, then you change everything over to that particular size or color. There's a little fish. I don't know, he ain't too little. Feels pretty good. You know, one of the things we want to talk about in this part of the video is the depth finder. The thing about people have got to understand is that depth finder back there, that's a good fish. That depth finder back there, it is your eyes. I mean, that is the only way you can see underneath the water. And you know, seeing underneath the water, that's not as big as I'd hoped he'd be, but he's still a pretty good little old keeper. But if you can't see what's going on, what's underneath you, then you're at a terrible disadvantage. So the depth finder in this technique right here is one of the most important pieces of equipment on your boat, because you've got to have it to know what's underneath you, where you want to know. Where do you get? Do you get on the outside of the brake line? Do you get on the inside of the brake line? Do you get right over the structure? You've got to have that depth finder, and it's got to be in a good location on your boat so that you can see what's going on underneath your boat. Okay, let's put him back. What we did, I was on my way back in here to this standing timber you see. Well, I noticed that we've got all these fish on this depth finder suspended. So I turned around, put my trolling rods out, and now I'm on my way back in here. We had a big cold front come in last night. It really changed everything around. I'm having a hard time locating some fish today. So this is going to be a technique that I'm going to try. And that's a good point. Don't ever be afraid to change your tactics. The more arsenals you've got in your tackle box, the more techniques you've got, the better crappie fisherman you're going to be and the more fish you're going to catch. So therefore you're going to enjoy it a lot more. So don't be afraid to change your mind. Once you get out here on the water, there's no set rules. Come on in here, Mr. Crappie. I hope this is a crappie. Seems like to me that the stripe and the crappie are what they're doing there out here in their school together, and they've got these bait fish ran up in the backs of these pockets, these pods of bait fish, and yeah, that's crappie. A little bit better crappie too. So these fish, what they've done, they've got these baits, and they've got this bait, and they've got them rounded up back here in the backs of these pockets. It's crappie. And then they're mixed in here with these striped bass, or white bass, whatever you want to call them, and they're in here gorging themselves on these bait. So what you got to do, you just got to, got to get in here and stay in here with them, and cull out the stripe from the crappie. Of course, there's nothing wrong with catching them. It's a lot more fun to catch something than it is nothing. But what we've done, we've got these fish suspended back here in these pockets. We're going to catch some more of them right now. There's another one. There's another one. If all these weighed 1.5 pounds, buddy, we'd be in business. But he's a keeper. Come up here, son. Okay. Here again, he hit that jig, and that jig is on a 1/16 ounce head. Thanks, son. One of the most important parts of the trolling technique is the rod placement. You'll see here that I've got a 12-foot rod and I've got a 6-foot rod. I've got a 12-foot rod and I've got a 6-foot rod. Off the back of the boat, I have a 10-foot and I have 2 8-foots. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to keep about a 3-foot interval in between those jigs. And what that does, that helps us when we make a turn, like we're going to go out here and follow this creek channel, it helps us keep those jigs separated because they do have a tendency to swing around back there and get tangled up. So if you had all one length rod, this would almost be impossible to do. You want to go from a 12 to a 6, from a 10 to an 8 to a 5. So mix your colors up, mix your sizes up, and stay with the different length poles, and you'll be a troller before you know it. I've really enjoyed shooting this video. We've caught a lot of fish, and the people at Bass Pro Shop have been great. Crappie fishing is a great sport. It deserves to be shared with someone. So find you a buddy, get out there, try some of these techniques that we've taught you, and I'll see you on the lake.